I mentioned in episode 29 of the podcast about my days of having a basketball hoop on Cherry Lane when I was growing up. Basketball was my favorite sport. I grew up in the 80s when the Boston Celtics and the Los Angeles Lakers were the top teams dueling it out, and Michael Jordan came along and set the sporting world on fire. There was nothing I wanted more than to emulate these incredible athletes: Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parish, Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Charles Barkley, and so many more. And I was lucky enough for 2 consecutive summers in 1989 and 1990 to get to experience a little bit of what it would be like to be an NBA basketball player by attending the Kevin McHale Basketball Camp at the Ocean Edge Resort in Brewster. And here I'm going to share a little bit of what it was like as we go way, way back in the day. So ironically, I wasn't meant to go to Kevin McHale Basketball Camp. It was actually a fallback plan by my mother. So in 7th grade, way back when I was younger, I was wicked smart. So I took my SATs when I was in 7th grade. The Johns Hopkins University that paid for me to take my SATs when I was 13, they wanted me to go to Genius Camp, and it was too expensive. And, I'm one of 5 kids, and we weren't exactly rich growing up. So, my mother feels bad now, but as a man in my 40s, I can see how are you going to afford that, to send me to Genius Camp? And the thing is, as a kid then and as a man now, I'd have much rather have gone to Kevin McHale Camp than going to a camp where I was going to learn. It's like going to school again, so the hell with that. Ocean Edge Resort, you can read about it in my Iconic Hotels and Motels book. It's on Route 6A, and it's part of the Nickerson family owned all of the property. It's this big, sprawling resort. And back in 1989, it was even bigger when you're a kid, 11 years old, going to play there with hundreds of other kids. There were so many other kids that I knew from school that had gone to the same camp. So that was a lot of fun, seeing some familiar faces, but then a lot that I didn't know from around the Cape and probably New England. I bet there were a lot that came from off Cape. But then meeting Kevin McHale, he was 6'10", so he's the biggest human I'd ever seen in real life. And you get to see him shooting free throws and dunking the basketball, and that's another thing. Seeing him on TV and then seeing him in person, it was crazy. I don't remember if it was the first or second year that I went, but my team that I was on, because we had like a tournament that we played where you'd learn fundamentals, but then you'd actually play games, shirts and skins, and there was a lot of outdoor and indoor basketball courts. I remember one day it was rainy, so we had to go to an actual indoor gym to play, and I couldn't tell you where it is now. And we all got hooked up when we got there. We got our swag packages. We got our own basketball and a pair of the Chuck Taylor Converse sneakers. I think they're still, they've come back around in style now. They really didn't have any support or cushioning. They're kind of high tops. Can you see them in your head? They've got the star on the side. I was a big fan of the Nike Air Jordans. So getting Converse Chuck Taylors, I was like, ugh. I don't know if I wore them beyond that week that I was at Kevin McHale Camp. He had special guests there too, Kevin McHale. He brought in friends of his. Interestingly, the first friend that he was supposed to have come be a part of the camp was Danny Ainge. But he ended up not coming because he got traded. He got traded that summer from the Celtics to the Sacramento Kings. But that was all right. They had shirts for sale, these oversized caricature shirts. They were big in the 80s, but there was one for Danny Ainge with the Sacramento Kings with his face like 10 times bigger than his body. There was a life-size cardboard cutout of Kevin McHale there too. And on a recent live stream, my mother told me that my sister Ashley had knocked it over and then was running away embarrassed, and Kevin McHale was yelling to her, "Wait, Ashley, come back." I don't remember that, but it's a funny story to kind of stick in there. I ended up having some interactions with Kevin McHale. I think he coached everybody's team once for one game. So there's a photo of me high-fiving him. I got a picture with him, and I was too scared to say something to him. So my mother basically had to yell to him. And then he came over and he took a picture with me. I was like up to his hip. But my favorite story of Kevin McHale has to be when I tried to get him to autograph my basketball. So the basketballs that they gave out at the camp had Kevin McHale's signature on it. But he's sitting down, and I bring the basketball to him, and he basically takes his Sharpie and he traces over his own name. So he signed it, but he signed it over his own real signature. And I got to meet a lot of the special guests that he had there. He had Casey Jones, who coached the Celtics when they won the title in '86. So he was a legend. I got to meet Casey Jones, and he actually autographed my basketball, unlike Kevin McHale, who traced his name. But then I also got to meet Doc Rivers, and Doc Rivers was still playing then. He was still playing on the Atlanta Hawks, and he was super nice. I've always had a soft spot for Doc Rivers, so I was thrilled when he won a title with the Celtics in 2008. I got to meet the iconic voice of the Celtics, Johnny Most. He did the radio broadcast for, probably 30 years, I would think. But he was near the end of his life here. He was very old, and he was in a wheelchair. And I remember my mother kind of felt bad for him because he was just sitting there and no one was around him. And I didn't know who he was because I didn't ever see him. But then when I talked to him, I recognized the voice. He had this really, I don't want to say raspy voice, but he talked like this, kind of had a voice like that. I can't really do it. But we didn't have anything for him to sign. So my mother gave him a blank check that he autographed the back of. And I don't know where that ever ended up. But Johnny Most autographed one of my mother's blank checks. Most interestingly and probably most out of place as far as guests that I remember at Kevin McHale Camp was wrestling legend Big John Studd. He had just made his comeback in 1989. He won the Royal Rumble in WWF, and he was at WrestleMania 5. So he was there, and it was weird because it's all basketball players, and then there's Big John Studd. I can only assume that there must have been a show at the Melody Tent around that time because WWF would do shows at the Melody Tent. So I'm assuming he must have been there. I don't know how he got the favor called in to come to Kevin McHale Camp, but he was there signing autographs. He was another one, super huge human being. I just remember how much fun it was the entire time, even learning the fundamentals, how to dribble behind your back. You were taught to pretend like you were slapping yourself on the ass. That would kind of bring the ball around your hips to the other side. I still remember that 30 years later. Every day we'd have lunch, usually under a tent outside. And most of the time there would be one of the old NBA films playing. If you're of my age or around my age, it was either the seasons for the champions. Like I watched the 86 Celtics championship video probably a couple times. But there was the first Michael Jordan video back before he had won any titles. I remember that stuff, but I can't remember if my team, the Hoosiers, if we won our tournament. I'm pretty sure we didn't. I have so many photos from that time of just, it'd be me and then a bunch of random people or some people that I went to school with that I knew. But I go through these photos from Kevin McHale Camp, and the irony is that there are two separate photos with this same kid giving the stink face to the camera. It's funny because it's like my mother was taking pictures and this stupid kid happened to be like in the way two different times. And I was going through the photos and I said, wait, that's him again. Stink face boy. I should post that online on social media and see if anyone knows who he is. Ironically, after Kevin McHale Camp the second year in 1990, I didn't go back to Ocean Edge and even see those basketball courts again until last year, riding my bike with my buddy Mike. That was like we went through Ocean Edge and I said, oh my God, this is the basketball court. And I took pictures of the court, 30 years after last stepping on it. Those were some good times, though. Obviously, I never became an NBA player, so Kevin McHale failed in his training of me. But I do have so many great memories of my 2 years of going to Kevin McHale Camp. Did any of you ever go to like a sports summer camp that was held by someone famous, a famous athlete? I know the Cape Cod Baseball League does clinics like that on Cape Cod during the summers, but none of those players are famous yet. So you'd only know after the fact if someone went to the majors, if you were in the presence of greatness. I hope you enjoyed that little trip back in the day to my 2 years of experience at Kevin McHale Basketball Camp at Ocean Edge in Brewster. It was sure a great time.